Welcome to this week's edition of Freedom and Prosperity Radio, the weekly radio news magazine that we put together each and every weekend so that you have the information to go into some of those conversations, and you know which conversations we mean. Sometimes it's with family, sometimes it's with coworkers, and you know they've just been reading too much of their Twitter feed, and you just want to have some backup so you can say, go check this stuff out. Now, start off at capitalresearch.org. Actually, honestly, you could probably do that in every conversation and send them to capitalresearch.org. Joining us, research director there, Michael Watson. Michael, how are you this weekend? And thanks for joining us.
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on.
So, I remember when this story first bubbled up of college sports and unions. I think it was Northwestern University because they had to be somewhere, and why not be in Illinois for this? And they started talking about unionizing collegiate athletics. It didn't take them long in the game of name, image, likeness to jump into, maybe we should have a name, image, likeness union. Tell us what you found in this is, surprise new place of union indoctrination.
Well, it was actually before name, image, and likeness, because this goes back at least to the Obama administration, which I want to say name, image, and likeness was like 2021.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
I'm pretty sure Kavanaugh wrote the opinion, so it would have been during or after the Trump administration.
Oh,
but
sure.
The idea of unionizing college athletes, and in fact, like government action to deem them unionizable, goes back to the Obama administration, National Labor Relations Board under the Obama administration, which governs unionization relations in the private sector. So again, you mentioned Northwestern. It was either Northwestern or Northeastern, one of these private universities. They're subject to the National Labor Relations Act. So the National Labor Relations Board, under the Obama administration, was looking into whether revenue sport athletes, I want to say it was football, counted as employees. And if they count as employees, then they can be unionized. And obviously, this was before name, image, and likeness, so the idea for the players is pretty simple. This way we can potentially make money. And for the unions, they could get union dues. Now, obviously, that got laid on when the Trump administration came in. That got either reversed or laid on the table. So it didn't go forward even after name, image, and likeness came out. Well, Joe Biden comes in. He's backed by the labor unions, very adamant that his is going to be the most pro-labor administration in history. And lo and behold, we're back with college sports unions.
Now, I remember the question regarding the things that could be negotiated in a union agreement, given the nature of the athletes, but everything up to and including compensation by pay were all on the table. Is that still the case in this discussion? That and the reason I brought up name, image, likeness was I recall the first times it was, the first rebuffs were, these are amateur athletes. They're not being paid because they're getting so on and so forth, and they don't want to lose their amateur status. But now that we've sort of opened the Pandora's box of compensating college athletes, is that accelerated this conflagration towards unions?
I don't know if it's accelerated it, but it's certainly taken away that amateurism claim, or really complicated the amateurism claim. Obviously for the unions, the goal of adding more members in college athletics it's potentially a big source of union dues, and especially with the private schools where the National Labor Relations Act is the relevant governing force. In a lot of those Northeastern schools are in states that don't have right to work laws. And all those college athletes, if they're unionized, whether they want to be union members or not, they're going to have to pay dues. So, there's certainly potential revenue for the unions here.
it was interesting. You mentioned that President Biden has repeatedly said Mr. Scranton, PA, is going to be Mr. Union. Yet I just saw a report, I think it was within the last 2 months, Michael, that said the union membership continues, private sector union membership continues to decline even in the first 2 years of President Biden's administration. Is that why they're, targeting call it fresh regions of our society?
Oh, absolutely. The every year the Bureau of Labor Statistics, federal government, estimates based on their surveys what percentage of the workforce is unionized. And even though, again, you've seen a lot of coverage, they're unionizing Starbucks, they're unionizing Amazon, look at all these unions that are forming, they're unionizing all these journalists. Mm-hmm. This is the big the number of times that big labor's big comeback has been prophesied. If I had a nickel, I'd have a lot of nickels.
You'd be unionized to spend your nickels.
And the unions would be spending my nickels. But, this year, like all those other times, the comeback wasn't borne out by these estimates. So even though the number of union members went up, the proportion of union membership went down, despite the fact that they had the most favorable federal government that they've had in a very long time, even probably more favorable than the Obama administration. Even though, again, there's been a lot of favorable press, even though the labor market's really tight, which usually favors union organizing because workers think that they're more likely to get more of what they want to negotiate for, and less likely to lose their jobs if the plant closes. So it should have been really all the dominoes were in a row that it should have been a good year for organized labor, and it wasn't. And that does explain, and over the longer term, what I call the long decline in what's called union density, which is the proportion of union members in the economy. That long decline that starts in the 50s really takes off, in the 70s and 80s, and continues to this day. The long decline has sent organized labor looking for basically new markets, new groups of workers to organize. This is why you have UAW members who work in casinos. This is why you have, the SEIU. Oh yeah, goes to these states. I mean, obviously, we all know Fight for 15 and the fast food restaurants, but they also go to these states like California and say, oh, you should deem all your Medicare home caretakers to be government workers so we can unionize them.
Right.
Which Vinnie Vernuccio of the Mackinac Center calls the dues skim.
Uber driver unions and things like that.
Right. And in Seattle, they're trying to say that Uber drivers can unionize. And, you look at the Democrat and organized labor sort of, this is everything we want legislation at the federal level, the PRO Act. They want to abolish the distinction between franchisees and franchisors. Why? Well, because that way SEIU can negotiate directly with the franchisors and get a union agreement. Right.
So the guy who owns one McDonald's can't say, hey, it's just me here. It's like, no, we want Ray Kroc's estate. That's what we want.
Right. We want big McDonald's in Oak Park, Illinois, or at least it was in Oak Park, Illinois. I think they may have moved to Chicago. We want big McDonald's to be on the hook, too, and we want big McDonald's to tell you that when we show up with union cards that you have to recognize us as the union. All of this is unions looking around trying to figure out how to stop that long decline. And they've been looking and trying to stop that long decline basically since it started. And what they haven't been able to change are a couple of fundamentals. And what they haven't been able, and those fundamentals are that the economy of 2023 is not the economy of 1946. Western Europe is not rebuilding from the Second World War. Japan isn't under occupation. You want to go further, Eastern Europe isn't under Soviet domination. And China is not, it's still a communist state, but it's not a communist state in the same way it was in 1949.
Right.
So a lot of the, so that's one thing. Then you have another, the unions back in the 30s when they were first recognized, they got a lot of what they wanted and that people thought they should get. They got the 8-hour workday as the standard. They got, a minimum wage established. They got, a lot, basic workplace safety standards. And once you, this goes for any political or advocacy movement. When you get the popular easy things, that leaves you with all the unpopular difficult things. And that changes how people think of what your agenda is. So, today you have, or a couple of years ago, Liz Schuler, head of the AFL-CIO, coming out for International Pronouns Day.
Mm-hmm.
Not even an economic issue.
Right, and everyone raises their hand. Michael Watson is on with us, a research director with the Capital Research Center, also one of the hosts of the Influence Watch podcast. And I wonder, Michael, you were just talking about how, it started out with a bang and everything easy and popular was given to the unions. They even were able to work public policy, use some influence to get government support for some of the things that the unions should have been doing, or at least purported to be doing themselves. Like Marxism as a governing form, I believe that the United States infatuation with the unions was born on somewhat of a flimsy house of cards that wasn't really going to manifest. Is there anything to the feeling that the decline in union membership is just predictable in the same way that residents of the Soviet Union started realizing, what did George Orwell say? All animals are equal, just some are more equal than others, and that there were still rich oligarchs under communism. They just were assigned that by the. That's a uniquely American truth that the Jimmy Hoffas of the world.
You want to know. Union leadership will complain that the long decline starts in the 50s, and what's going on in the 50s? Well, there's legislation that curtails some of unions' coercive abilities, the Taft-Hartley Act and the Landrum-Griffin Act. And unions will complain about this. Well, you have to look about why those laws were passed. Taft-Hartley, we're coming right out of the Second World War, demobilization, and what do the unions do? They kick off a strike wave. Biggest strike wave in American history. Mm-hmm. Exacerbates really awful inflation. And it basically resurrects the moribund Republican Party with a mandate to do something to bring labor relations back into balance. Landrum-Griffin Act, 1959. Well, there have just been 4 or 5 years of bipartisan hearings. Senator John McClellan, Democrat of Arkansas, his chief counsel was one Robert Kennedy, legendary liberal, brother of President Jack, another legendary liberal. And what they found was that America's largest labor union at the time, the Teamsters, was, corrupt to a degree that was startling. It was, compromised by organized crime. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't alone. And again, it took another 30 to 40 years for the federal government, despite really serious legislative efforts to crack down both on labor racketeering in specifically and organized crime in general, to really root out that sort of corrupted influence. Mm-hmm. And, because the unions weren't able to govern themselves, they had to be governed. Mm-hmm. And they were governed, and they are governed.
Mm-hmm. Well, I was thinking about that in connection with the corporate raider era of the 80s, where in a lot of cases unions and union leadership benefited from those ratings, and a real attitude developed that the union workers were just sort of secondary parts of the conversation, and there really started to seem an attitude in amongst people. I grew up in New York City. It's certainly not known as a union town as much as Chicago is, but it was a pretty good one.
And the New York unions were pretty notorious for their mafia influence. I mean, that's the Teamsters in that area were pretty bad. There are a lot of stories about influence from the five families over organized labor in New York.
A big pile of money just sitting around. Can't imagine why. But there was also the rank and file started to say, "Hold it."
Not just a pile of money. It's a pile of money and the ability to enact to put a chokehold on various parts of the economy that then requires another pile of money to open up.
Yeah, but then also, and it's one thing if it was actually benefiting the workforce, but it seemed like over the 80s and into the 90s, the workforce started to say, hold it, what am I getting out of this? Especially as jobs started leaving and going overseas. Did that also hurt the union movement? Was when predictably they weren't able to deliver, as you were saying before, the hard things, and then when jobs started leaving and the unions didn't really have an answer.
The jobs weren't just leaving overseas; they were leaving to the South because we've invented air conditioning. We've made air conditioning accessible. We've passed civil rights legislation that makes it, you can now morally live in the South, without having to participate in the Jim Crow regime. Mm-hmm. So all these other competitors are coming online. And the ability of the unions to deliver the higher wages, shorter hours, better pensions, combined with the political agenda to, make that the baseline, is being whittled away. As the jobs go away, the people go away. I mean, part of why California is what California is now is because after the end of the Cold War, a lot of the defense industries either closed down or dissipated to other parts of the country. All these changes are ongoing, and organized labor is built on stasis.
So what is then the sales pitch? Is it the same sales pitch unions were doing? And Michael is on with us. Where he's got a great podcast about unions coming to college athletics. Here as we look at our brackets and wonder who's going to make the Final Four.
I went to William and Mary for me. March Madness ends before it begins. Since William and Mary has never qualified. We are one of 3 schools that hasn't.
Oh my goodness. Well, it's okay because I grew up a sports fan in New York, and it seemed like the entire NHL season was designed just to get the Islanders out of the playoffs for a good bit of it. So I understand your pain. As they look to these fertile cities, are they still using the same sales pitches that they were using in the 50s? The workers of the world unite, and we'll finally show those greedy university presidents.
We built the middle class. We gave you the weekend. I mean, it's the same. It's the same pitch. We'll get you more money. We'll get you easier working conditions. We'll standardize. In the particulars of athletics, kind of like with you remember when this was years and years ago now when the Writers Guild went on strike, all the TV writers struck, and they were striking over the distribution of royalties
Oh, yeah. It was right after the cast of Friends, each one of them signed $1 million an episode contract. And then we had a writer's strike. I can't imagine why. I think I remember seeing one of them saying, let's see Jennifer Aniston ad-lib her way through the next episode. And, of course, the fruit of that was all the reality TV, because they realized $1 million prize was better than $1 million per episode.
But yeah, so there's some of there's some of that too. We're going to get you better marketing and better merchandising shares. I give them the credit that the principal selling point is more for, in this case, the players, but for the activists, there's more than that. There's more than just getting the players more, because you've seen a little bit, especially again in the southern states, where some of the far left activists go, hey, wait a minute, we can use a college sports union to push our entire agenda.
Right.
Because we can take them out on strike if, let's say, Florida doesn't repeal the parental rights education bill, or Georgia doesn't repeal its voting bill, or we'll take the college basketball players out on strike if North Carolina doesn't pass some change to its education policy.
I could see it.
The social justice unionism implications are pretty serious. So, do I believe they would have quite the power to do that? Well, I mean, obviously it depends on the particular situation, but would the players want to do it? Would I think they would not be quite as amenable to that sort of thing as the writers for In These Times might hope. In These Times is a socialist news magazine that, if you want to know what the socialists think about themselves, go read In These Times. I don't think they'd be quite as eager to give up their season as In These Times thinks they might be.
Well, until they all wind up on CBS This Morning or Face the Nation, and all of a sudden the quarterback who's on strike to keep Notre Dame from playing Georgia for some political purpose says, "Ooh, this is a lot more fun than doing squats in the weight room," and that's a loud siren song. Is that as your podcast is titled, that influence watch? What is the internet alive with? What's the phrase that pays? I'm an influencer, and I don't have to do anything. Ask Paige Spirowak. You don't even have to play golf anymore. You're just an influencer, and you can make big money doing it. Maybe that's the next field for the union movement, is the influencers union on Twitter. Well,
after they go after independent contracting rules, this is part of the SEIU campaign against the. This is more Uber and Lyft.
Yeah.
To change independent contracting to make all those Uber and Lyft drivers employees rather than contractors, and that way they can be unionized. Well, maybe they'll do the same thing with Instagram. Who knows?
It's scary, but I mean, you say it, and we say it with tongue in cheek, but only a little bit, because we've seen this happen.
It's not as far of a stretch as you would want it to be.
Yeah. No. Absolutely. So what is and given that gold ring of that kind of influence of being able to say, and from my industry, Michael Watson on with us, host of the Influence Watch podcast, and of course research director at Capital Research Center. In my industry, there are a few groups of my esteemed colleagues that I would rather not hear talk about political or social issues more than sports broadcasters. Every time I heard a sports let's talk about guns. Oh no, please.
Keith Olbermann used to be a sportscaster.
Yes, exactly, and and he is the Al Gore of sportscaster, turned pundit, and you would just have a maelstrom of talking heads, everywhere you turn, talking about how Georgia needs to do this, and I think they're looking at the amount of media that is sports driven that that could be a real dangerous nuclear silo.
Yeah, no, there is the liberals, the progressive movement, have always seen that the personal is political, and there's a sort of running joke that that a lot of sports writers or political writers, liberal political writers who couldn't hack it as political writers, so they ended up being sports writers.
Mm-hmm.
So there is there is, and I mean, we've seen it with ESPN. I mean, ESPN is not what it used to is not what it used to be, and now, especially since 2020, went really, really political, and a lot of people didn't like that. It is a fact of American politics that men vote right of the country, and it is a fact of sports viewership that it skews male.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's a great way to influence. But you mentioned, and you brought up the real explosion of unions in the workforce in the 40s. Are we destined to see the same thing in this sports world, where there's going to be a massive explosion, and then the fallout is going to settle, and we're going to wind up with less sports, worse sports, and less opportunity for young people to use their athletic ability to gain a postgraduate degree in some cases from an esteemed college?
You're gonna get a preview in minor league baseball, because the minor league baseball players just unionized with the Major League Baseball Players Association.
Mm-hmm.
Now, minor league baseball players have been very underpaid, very under-resourced for basically as long as the minor leagues have been around. So, it's kind of it's that I can't really blame them for trying to do something about it.
Yeah, but you saw that you mentioned the franchise versus franchisor. Isn't the minor league baseball union based on the idea that, okay, the Toledo Mud Hens may not have a ton of money in a big stadium, but the Cleveland Indians do, and we can go after them? Isn't it built? I'm sure that's part of it. Yeah.
But again, we'll see. The Georgia Bulldogs have a lot of money. I mean, we'll see how many minor league teams don't make it.
Mm-hmm.
Because the cost of doing business goes up.
Right.
We'll see, how many, maybe major league teams have to raise ticket prices, and whether that causes potentially a death spiral of attendance, then, more financial losses, then, fewer people watching on TV, then more financial losses,
Predictably, yeah.
We'll get a good look as a preview, because to the extent that college basketball and college football are minor league basketball and minor league football, we'll get a view of what might happen when we see what happens in the next 5-10 years with minor league baseball.
So what, Michael, does a listener have to tell their candidates? And we're in the middle of silly season where Democrats and Republicans are running against one another for their nomination to run for the House of Delegates. And it would be, I imagine this is something that would have to be a state-by-state thing. I don't know how right-to-work states would have it differently. Would it put Virginia Tech and UVA at a disadvantage over a union state like Illinois? What is the legislative landscape going forward towards this idea of unionizing college athletes, at least in the revenue sports?
Sure. At Capital Research Center, we're a 501c3. We don't take positions on electoral politics. But as a legislative matter in Virginia, as I understand it, I may live in Maryland now, but I grew up in Virginia. Now, you mentioned Virginia Tech and UVA. those are public universities, and at least historically, public university employees are considered state employees. And that would mean that Janus v. AFSCME, which basically nationalizes right to work in the government sector, would apply.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Now, I know Virginia has recently changed how it considers collective bargaining by government employees.
Yeah.
Under Northam. So I'm not sure where all that stands, but that would be a complicating factor because my belief, and I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know. Maybe there's a legal explanation why it would be different in sports as opposed to grad students.
Mm-hmm.
But my suspicion is that your UVA, Virginia Tech, William and Mary, would all be considered, would all be considered for these purposes state employees, and then subject to state law, which means that your University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign would have a completely different set of rules.
Wow.
Now, private universities, so University of Richmond,
Mm-hmm.
Duke, who else? Georgetown.
Oh, yeah.
They would be under the federal National Labor Relations Act, and that's where right to work would come in. Duke in North Carolina, University of Richmond in Virginia,
mm-hmm.
They would have right to work protections. Georgetown in the District of Columbia would not.
Man, what a landscape! What a pockmark!
It would get real complicated.
I can imagine they would then start trying to push for national labor laws that would usurp state independence, and then we have to go
they're already doing that for all private sector workers. That's part of the PRO Act. The PRO Act gets rid of all private sector right to work laws, and that was a bill. That is the bill that the labor unions and the Democratic Party and the Biden administration are trying to get passed to overwrite, basically all of American private sector labor relations law. And that would supersede and effectively vitiate all right to work laws in the private sector.
Michael Watson is on with us, and I apologize for this. I nerd out on talking with Michael about these things because and you should listen to the Influence Watch podcast, and you're going to probably find yourself doing the same thing. As every sentence he says prompts you to ask 8 questions, because you hadn't thought of something before he said it, or you thought of it, and then you hear him say it, and you go, oh yeah. But go to that old saw that I believe still is in effect as the law of the land, the Bill of Rights, Amendments 9 and 10 regarding a retaining of the people and of the states, respectively, on things not listed in here. I know that they pervert the interstate commerce clause for a lot of this stuff, Michael. Is that what they're working on to say, forget about Amendments 9 and 10 about, things not enumerated here?
They did it under the again, I'm not a lawyer, but from what I know of the history, the switch in time that saved 9, the defection of constitutionalist Supreme Court justices to uphold parts of the New Deal to prevent that is credited with preventing FDR from passing the court. The National Labor Relations Act itself was one of those cases that got switched. So we've been working outside the strict construction of the Constitution in labor relations law since 1935, when the National Labor Relations Act passed. At this point, it kind of exists, but and you've seen kind of some pullback in some cases, especially in the government sector with things like Janus v. AFSCME, but the strict construction of labor law exited with the switch in time to save 9.
it just strikes me as such a bad bit of business, especially in a world where their rap is increasingly less and less popular amongst those who have choices to go and prey on these college athletes. And we see how the LA school division can be shut down because the cafeteria workers didn't want to go to work, and so everyone else just shut down with them. That's some of the problem as well, isn't it? Because some of these unions, they'll target one sector of the university, and in this case, maybe the athletes become the celebrity ones, and they'll pitch to a William and Mary. Well, our union could make it a little bit better for you guys to make the NCAA basketball tournament because we're going to keep it fair, Michael. And and Selection Sunday will be more about who contributed the most to the union coffers. I don't know, but they'll certainly pitch that to the lower end revenue sports, and they'll tell the high end revenue sports that you don't want the baseball team striking and closing down the entire football season, do you? Because the NFL draft is coming. I mean, I listen to, and it's not hard to imagine the greasy, misrepresentative rhetoric and sales pitching that these folks are going to do towards getting this.
I mean, it gives you, just to give you a sense of the power that organized labor wants over these choke points of the economy, entertainment, let's just say American public life. Since 1947, there has been a ban on what are known as secondary strikes. So if I'm an employer, my employees want more money, they're allowed to go on strike. That's their right under labor law. Mm-hmm. If they don't like that the person that I'm buying, let's say I'm a winery, the person I'm buying grapes from, they don't, my employees don't like that person, they can't strike me to make him change his policies or to make me not buy from him. Mm-hmm. That's been banned since 1947. That PRO Act that I mentioned, the Organized Labor Christmas Tree Bill, mm-hmm. that would allow that. That would lift the prohibition.
Well, we see it in the cancel culture woke world. I mean, anyway, with the divest programs.
Yeah. Your real world examples of this kind of secondary boycott behavior are the targets against Rush Limbaugh when he was alive. Every time they go after Fox's advertisers, mm-hmm. every time they go after any sort of conservative radio shows advertisers. Oh yeah, that's a secondary boycott.
The secondary strikes and all this stuff, it doesn't really help anyone at the end. And I will circle all the way back to the beginning. You were talking about the corruption at the head of the union movement, Michael. It only really goes to benefit a very, very small number of people. And I hope the college kids... I don't think they're getting it in elementary and high school, so I hope somebody in college is saying, listen, this is only going to help a small group of people, and it's not you.
You would hope. The labor leaders back in the 20th century, many of them were exploiting their positions at choke points of American life to enrich themselves. This was the sort of Jimmy Hoffa way of doing mm-hmm. business. Today, it's more ideological, or at least it seems to be. Now, they're still getting six-figure salaries, but the motivation seems more to be ideological, at least as far as you have exceptions like the UAW where mm-hmm. Two former international presidents have now been convicted of crimes, but in a lot of cases it's ideological. It's advancing that full spectrum social justice agenda that goes well beyond simply making more wages, less hours, safer working conditions for the workers.
Right. So what does your crystal ball say the future looks like as we go forward in this, Michael? What are you sensing, and what do you think the next steps are in this movement?
Well, obviously they would like to get, as they did in the Obama administration, a live labor board case to get some some college athletes to sign a union authorization and they would prefer the university just to agree to bargain with the union. But, failing that, as has been often the case with graduate student unions, to then take it to the labor board and go up the labor board process to try to get the labor board to say, make a final determination that the college athletes are unionizable.
It seems like a reasonable thing is the threat of that would get a university board of visitors, say at UVA, to flinch and say, we don't want the alumni association being seen dragged into this. So if we want the endowment continuing to get its contributions, we want to stay off the front pages of ESPN, the magazine, that kind of thing.
That's the typical union tactic, the corporate campaign. When they have been unionizing graduate student employees, graduate student workers, there have actually been a fair number of universities that have challenged either the designation of the workers as employees, or failing that the insisting upon a private vote of the graduate students to determine whether they wish to form a union. So I think we'll see at least one university fight it.
Okay. Well, we'll keep watching for that, because I know that it never turns out the way they sell it to you, and I feel like that is the message that has to be whenever we discuss this. It sounds great in theory, and there are instances. I stand here as the son-in-law of a union organizer, a union president, for decades, the union treasurer of a machinist union, whose pensioners loved him, and the union actually functioned as they were supposed to, is simply there to make sure there was a pension fund and that people had health care insurance that they all managed themselves. They never asked the company to do it. They just said, give us the money and we'll invest it and we will do it. And these the pensioners are getting 14 checks a year because the pension fund was well managed. They survived the corporate raider era because they owned the pensions themselves. I mean, it was a master case of one of those instances where I'd love to just say all unions are bad. I've seen them run well. I guess it's just that corruption of power, Michael. Is that your sense, that when
corruption
somebody
of power, corruption of ideology, corruption of money? I mean, you wish that every union was as well run as the one you've just described, but unfortunately, that is not the case.
Yeah. I don't even know if they are anymore. He passed away 8 years ago, so who knows who's running the joint now. I mean, it could be completely screwed up there. But Michael, I appreciate it so very much, as always. And what's coming up next at the in the Influence Watch podcast?
Let's see. We have. We always figure these things out the week that we record.
Well, it's good to be timely. I get that.
So I can give you a couple recent ones. We had Bethany Mandel on to talk her book Stolen Youth. We had a couple weeks ago now Larry Correa on to talk about his book about the Second Amendment. We had Spencer Clavin on to talk about his book How to Save the West. We cover we get a fair number of people, and we cover a lot of things on the Influence Watch podcast.
Well, and it's a terrific addition to the Capital Research Center, and I was enjoying the BLM Aftermath program as well. Again, another one of those instances where it wasn't exactly what we were sold, was it, Michael? How many times are we going to keep saying, "Gee, that just didn't turn out the way we were told it was"?
And there's an old saying about a road paved with good intentions.
That's right. Well, we'll meet you halfway on the way to perdition with a jack to fix your flat tire. Michael Watson, again, it's capitalresearch.org, and if you just go to the podcast link there or go to influencewatch.fireside.fm, you can find it there as well. You have a blessed week. Thank you for spending so much time with us. Like I said, we could do a 4-hour program with Michael each time he's on, and I appreciate it, and appreciate everything you guys do at Capital Research Center, and have a great weekend.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for tuning in to this week's edition of Freedom and Prosperity Radio. On behalf of all of us here at the Virginia Institute for Public Policy, find out about the Tuesday morning group coalition meetings coming up and how you can be part of it. You don't even have to go to Richmond. You can watch in on video as well and be part of it in our Virginia Education Opportunity Alliance with our event going on this weekend. And you can find out more there as well of what's going on next with the Virginia Education Opportunity Alliance. I'm Joe Thomas. Until next weekend, so long, and thanks for all the fish.